Hey everyone, welcome back to Staying Connected, a podcast where I talk to other people about their stories with vascular Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, or VEDS, which I also have. Today I have a very special guest who's going to tell his story and his wife's story with vascular Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I think it's super, super special. His wife passed away not very long ago, and Patrick, I am just so grateful and amazed by your desire to do this. So thank you so much for being here today.
No problem. Thanks for setting this up. I'm excited to get to tell Jess's story and kind of get to share a perspective of somebody that loved someone with VEDS.
So how did you meet Jess?
So Jess and I met in undergrad. So it was sort of one of those moments like Jess had walked into this room and she really caught my attention. And at the time she had a boyfriend, but we got to know each other through classes and shared lab space together and really kind of just got to be friends first. And then that summer, we got to be roommates for about, I think, 2 months while we were kind of doing some summer classes and some summer job stuff at our university. And her situation had changed with her boyfriend at the time. And Jess and I finally kind of made things a little more serious. And we started dating back in July of 2012. And I guess that's kind of how everything ended up working. And that was the beginning of my senior year of college and Jess's junior year. Mm-hmm. And we got to spend my entire senior year together at our university. And then I tried to stay close once I graduated and Jess was still at Wittenberg.
So when did you guys get married?
We got married December 17th of 2016.
Wow, that was not that long ago.
No, it wasn't too long. I mean, our relationship definitely lasted a lot longer than obviously how long we were obviously married for, but it was just, we both ended up kind of being still in school and it was hard to get the timing right. So it ended up being that we kind of waited till we had a Christmas break. So around December was the time that we decided on.
Okay. So you guys just had it would have been your 3rd year anniversary.
Yep, it would have been.
Okay. And when you guys met, did she know that she had VEDS?
She did not. She always, so I guess sort of a backstory that maybe would shed some light onto why she maybe had this suspicion, but Jess's mom passed away from an aneurysm 3 days after Jess was born. And Jess's family was always very upfront with her and let her know, like, hey, this is, obviously what happened to your mom. And she had a great family growing up and raised her really, really well. But Jess, when I first met her, kind of hinted at this fact that she had some sort of suspicion or intuition that there was something not quite right with herself. But I just kind of chalked it up to being like nervous, like you kind of have this unknown situation that happened with your mom, obviously horrible, but like I was kind of just, I don't know, not in denial at the time because we didn't know anything. I was just trying to like reassure her, like, these things happen. Mm-hmm. But she had some sort of weird suspicion about it even before she actually knew anything was actually wrong.
Wow. So she grew up with her dad.
Her dad, and then I think her stepmom, Kathleen, kind of came into the picture, I think when Jess was around 2. Okay. And Kathy was really a good mother figure for Jess and kind of helped her and Dave both helped raise Jess. And Jess has a stepsister as well, Vicky, and she's really great as well.
That's wonderful that she had that kind of family support still.
Yes, no, it's really great because I think, things can go a lot of different ways. And I think Jess had a really great opportunity when she was growing up, having a whole family picture.
What was she going to school for?
Her and I had the same major in undergrad for biochemistry and molecular biology.
Oh, that's cool.
Yep. And then Jess decided that she actually wanted to go to pharmacy school. So while I was in grad school for molecular biology, she actually decided that she wanted to go to pharmacy school as well.
So at what point did she find out that she does have VEDS or did have VEDS?
So she found out in her senior year, I think it was October 31st or whenever Halloween is. It was the day after Halloween. She officially found out that she had VEDS. So I had been visiting her about a week beforehand and she had this pain in her neck. And I kind of was just a normal person, just being like, oh, you probably like just turned your neck weird. Like it's probably not a big deal. It's no problem. But she kept complaining about it even after I left throughout the week. And I was like, okay, well, this is weird. It hasn't kind of gotten any better yet.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think she woke up one morning, can't remember what day of the week it even was, but she was having trouble speaking and having trouble walking in a straight line. And so she was calling her mom and calling me and kind of like saying she's going to the ER, and she had a friend take her there. And when she got there, they realized something was not right.
Yeah.
So they flew her to the hospital. It was actually in Columbus, which is where I was in grad school. So I met her there, and the doctors kind of ran all these tests to kind of see what was going on. And they eventually like told her like, hey, you had a dissection in one of the arteries in the back of her neck. And they're like, in fact, actually, you've had one before, but didn't cause any symptoms. But this one has. You've had a stroke. And the symptoms she was having obviously were indicative of a stroke, but I think they obviously wanted to make sure everything was correct. And at that time, they were like, given your family history with what happened to your mom, and now this sort of unexplained dissection in your artery, like we suspect that you have some sort of vascular, either Ehlers-Danlos, or they even said Marfan's at the same time. But you probably don't have Marfan's. You probably have VEDS.
And how did she take that news?
Surprisingly well. I mean, I don't know. It's hard to. So I didn't get to see. I didn't interact much with her. Kind of for I think about a month. She went back up to her hometown and stayed with her parents to recover a little bit before she went back to school. And so I didn't really get a really good interaction other than like the first few, like a week to a week and a half, kind of right after it happened. But I think, if I can remember correctly, it was so long ago, but I kind of got a feeling that there was not a sense of relief, because obviously this isn't something that you would be relieved to have, but like kind of a one of those, like she had this premonition, obviously, when we were younger, and it was kind of like I knew I was right. I knew something wasn't right. Now let's try to do something about it.
Mm-hmm. So when did she had genetic testing then? Not long after that, I imagine.
Yeah, so I think it ended up taking about a year, because there was a lot of just hard fighting back and forth, trying to at least get somebody to cover the genetic testing. And eventually Jess's parents just decided that they'd pay for it because it was valuable for us to know, and valuable for the community to know, sort of like, what does Jess have, and what specifically can we do about it if there is anything. And then sort of additionally, if she doesn't have VEDS and doesn't have anything else, and this was just a happenstance thing, then like we don't need to sit here and worry about something that's not real.
Right. So it took a year then to get the genetic test.
Yeah, because I think Jess was in Columbus at the time that we finally got the results back.
Wow. And so when you got the genetic test results and actually got that diagnosis for sure, how did you handle it?
I think I handled it pretty much the way I always handled it. Probably not the best way, just sort of a denial standpoint, or even trying to explain like, just because you have VEDS doesn't mean that's ultimately what's going to cause you to pass away. Like, I came up with a bunch of answers to help kind of cope with the situation, that, any one of us could get in the car and die on the way to work that day. And, it doesn't have anything to do with what our genetics say is going to happen. So I tried to come from it in a logical standpoint, but I think at some level, the denial also is there as well, just to try to not face the kind of harsh reality of what's there.
And how does she cope with it?
I think surprisingly well. I have a hard time thinking. I can think of many times in which like I did not react well to or just was trying to pin up my own feelings, and sometimes they came out in ways that were just not a healthy way for them to come out. But Jess dealt with it really remarkably well. I don't know. I can think of like a few times, when everybody has their hard days, but like it usually didn't coincide with my hard days, and I could usually, just kind of we could come together and kind of talk about it. And I think we all felt better afterward, but she dealt with it in a much more controlled way, it felt like, than maybe the way I handled it.
And I know that, like, from talking to you previously, it seems like she just kept going.
Yeah, I think that's something that I find really powerful and has really impacted the way that I choose to live my own life. Um, Jess figured this out I think she was 21 at the time, just turned 21, that she has this horrible disease that, for the best case scenario, really would hopefully live to be in her 50s. And, she just still chose to hold herself to the highest standard you could possibly hold yourself to. I mean, she chose to go to pharmacy school after all of this was said and done, and got in, graduated, finished, and then, was board certified. So, I mean, at any point she could have decided that that wasn't something she wanted to do anymore, but she continued to push herself really hard and hold herself accountable, and really hold herself to a higher set of standards than most people would, even without having this disorder to have to face as well.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's something that I think, even going forward from now on, it's going to be something that speaks a lot to me. Obviously losing somebody with VEDS isn't easy, but I don't think that I think it was harder for her to live with VEDS and harder for us to face it while she was here, because it's hard to walk through life on pins and needles, wondering when that unknown time is going to come. Mm-hmm. And now we can move forward with it, raise awareness, and kind of, I can try to live my life the way that Jess did, and just being strong and not letting VEDS run our life.
That's really powerful, what you're doing with that.
I'll try. I think she did a much better job than I'm currently doing, but I think, just trying to get her story out there, I think it'll speak loudly to a lot of people, I think. Yeah. Just from a standpoint of, it was really humbling, I think, to get to know Jess and kind of live our lives together, because it really makes you think about when you interact with people on the street and they maybe came across some way that wasn't super friendly or wasn't the nicest that they could have. And it makes you realize that, you don't know what people's lives are like. You don't, just because you run onto them on the street and they look like a normal person doesn't mean that, they're not going through some really hard things. And I think for Jess and us, like, living with VEDS is sort of this, nobody knows what it is. Two, you don't have it. You look like a normal person. There's no way that somebody would really know that you have it unless there are some very subtle signs, but again, that's some assumptions. So it was sort of this, you're living your life normally, and people don't know what you have even after you tell them. And I don't think people realize how serious it is until, you wake up at 27 and you're no longer here.
So tell me about how you envisioned what it would look like.
I mean, I honestly, I guess this was more of a hopeful standpoint. I mean, I kind of assumed it would just be, one of these catastrophic events that hopefully would happen while we were asleep. And I could at least have some semblance of, she went peacefully in her sleep, even if I didn't know the reality of the situation because we were both asleep and maybe it wasn't this peaceful thing. But I sort of thought that, okay, that's how it'll happen. It won't be this big drawn out process, or it won't be this like thing filled with terror. Mm-hmm. And it'll be sort of like a going peacefully type of thing. I guess probably how everybody envisions death.
It's certainly what I hope for.
I think everybody would definitely hope for it. I myself included.
Yeah. Do you feel comfortable talking about with what happened?
Yeah. So I guess starting maybe a little bit, probably a week or 2 weeks before Jess actually ended up in the hospital the second time. So Jess was having some stomach pains, and we weren't really sure what was going on. And initially, we actually just went to urgent care just to see if they could give us like a quick answer if anything was going on. And they just kind of chalked it up to being like digestive pains. And Jess was like, it doesn't seem quite right. And Jess was like, something doesn't feel right. Like we need to go back to like the hospital and be a little more insistent on like doing some more tests because this isn't just digestive pain. So we went back to the hospital and we pushed him a little harder, and they did some scans and they found out Jess actually was having appendicitis. Mm-hmm. And I think once we knew that, it was, I think, a little bit reassuring, but also a little terrifying at the same time, because we know people with VEDS really shouldn't be having any type of surgical procedures if they can possibly avoid it. But an appendicitis is an emergency situation in of itself, so there aren't a whole lot of options. Mm-hmm. But we called her doctor at the Cleveland Clinic, and he said basically the same thing. Like, there's not much you can do. Just kind of have to address this situation as it is, and then move forward from it. And so they did the surgery. Jess was fine. She came out. I think we were all a little relieved. We were definitely on edge going through that procedure, but everything was fine. And then I had actually just left my job in the Cleveland area. I was getting ready to leave to go to Seattle. So I was actually off for the entire process of Jess recovering at home. So Jess was feeling really good. We were getting her up and out. And I think the day before, we had actually kind of gone out and done some errands while she was kind of actually getting fully recovered from her appendicitis. And the next morning, like, I'm getting everything kind of situated for my move out to Seattle. And Jess yells at me from our living room. And I was like, well, this is weird. Like, what's going on? And she's describing this like sudden pain that kind of shot down her back. And she felt like her left leg go numb. I was like, well, that doesn't sound good. But again, myself just trying not to think of the absolute worst thing that could possibly be going on, even though I should probably be a little more realistic at this point. I thought maybe it was just some back pain, not a big deal. But like, Jess couldn't get up, and I was like, well, I'm not going to try to carry you to the car. So we ended up calling the squad, and they come pick her up and take her to the hospital. And then there, her pain kind of had gotten to the point where it was just not bearable. I was kind of getting more concerned about it. And her family and stuff are starting to show up, and they do these scans, and they find out her aorta is dissected essentially from her ascending aorta all the way down to where it branches off for her left leg. So they call the helicopter and they take her to the Cleveland Clinic. So we got her to the Cleveland Clinic. She's in decently good spirits, given, pretty much being given the worst news you can possibly be given. Mm-hmm. I can remember, they're getting her all like set up for her surgery. They're going to replace the ascending aorta first, and she had a bad valve in her heart, so they were going to replace that as well while they were in there. But they're getting her ready for surgery, and I can remember we're wheeling her to the elevator to take her down, and she's like, she kind of looks at everybody, and she's like, "Oh, my husband, he's just putting on a good face. Like, I can tell he's really worried." And it's just kind of like, that was always Jess's perspective, to kind of at any point in time try to make a joke out of it. And mm-hmm. She wasn't wrong, but I was sort of the mindset like, hey, we got Jess to the right place as fast as we possibly could. We gave her the best chance we could possibly get her there. Mm-hmm. And so surgery went well, took way longer than I thought it would. So I was just kind of pacing around, trying not to think too much about everything. Yeah. But surgery went well. They left her in an induced coma for an extra, like, overnight, to basically make sure there was no excess bleeding. So that was sort of an insight into some terrifying stuff of seeing your significant other kind of hooked up to these life support machines. And it was really hard to see that. But just made it through the night, not a big deal. And actually, she finally came out of sedation and everything. They got her all patched back up and sewn back up. And I think she was recovering pretty well. They were trying to she was still in the intensive care unit, but they were trying to get her to the step down unit within a few days. So fast forward 3 days, Jess is doing great. Like, she wants to get up and sit in the chair. Like, she's interacting. First day, she actually decided that she would like to eat. And they find out they're slowly getting her blood pressure more in control, where they can put her to the step down unit. At least that's what they're hoping. Mm-hmm. But there was a sudden event where, Jess was in this increased state of pain, and we weren't sure what was going on. other than she was having trouble breathing. So they usher us out, and then no more than 3 minutes after we're out of the room, we hear a code blue, and I pretty much know, like, okay, this isn't good. Something's going on. Like, they didn't say who it was, but I knew where they were going, and I was like, it has to be Jess.
Yeah.
And long story short, Jess's aorta had ruptured, and there essentially wasn't anything left that they could do. And she passed away. And so it was sort of from the moment it all kind of started happening to the moment that you kind of hear this news is like, you're not, I don't know, at least for myself, I wasn't fully in the moment. I didn't know how to best explain it. It actually is sort of a really weird, twisted set of fate, but I decided to wear my Reds for VEDS shirt that day to the hospital because I wanted people to know, like, okay, Jess has this thing, like, this is something, and she's fighting it. And unfortunately, like, people got to see the worst possible thing that can happen with somebody with VEDS.
That is so devastating. How did you cope with it after? Like it just, I can't imagine losing my husband.
I don't know. I mean, a lot of family being around was really helpful. So I have family that lived in Texas, so they came up. Jess and I had a really nice house in the Cleveland area that, you know, my whole extended family could easily stay in with a few extra air mattresses. And I don't have a big family, but it was nice just to have everybody around. And Jess's family was just amazing as well. Jess's dad has obviously been through not losing his daughter, obviously, before, but losing his significant other, and just seeing him handle it and how he was helping other people get through that was really just sort of just struck me as like what an amazing person. Like, how can you handle this stuff, and how can you manage it in a way that you're also now helping other people when, you know, this is your replay for you, and it's not, can't get any easier, and probably is even more difficult.
Yeah, it's very inspiring for someone to do that.
Yes, very much so. But eventually, like, again, I was between jobs, and I decided to delay my job to go out to Seattle, and I decided to go down and spend some more time with my aunt and uncle down in Houston. I just tried to do a lot of things that removed me from the life that Jess and I had been living, because I think it's really hard to kind of drive by locations that, like, you guys had really significant events at, or like things that were memorable. Like, it can be, your mind goes into some really strange places. I think anything that triggers it to be a memory, even if it's good or bad, it can kind of make things just more difficult to handle.
Mm-hmm. What's your favorite memory of Jess?
Oh, I forget. People ask me this all this time. I think I shared this actually at Jess's funeral. I think one of my favorite memories of her, and it seems like it would be a really strange memory to be my favorite, but Jess had already had her genetic testing done, but she hadn't got her results yet. And one day I was working in the lab that I worked at downtown, and she calls and she's like, "Hey, I'm going to go get some coffee. Like, what do you want?" And so, like, I tell her, and we meet up in the parking lot, and just like, we're sitting there just kind of chatting a little bit, and she's like, "Hey, like, I got my genetic testing results, and like, I have the VEDS." And I think it was just another moment of like Jess's sheer strength, always trying to comfort other people with her diagnosis, which just strikes me as it should always be the other way around. But it's like, she brought me a cup of coffee because she knew that's what would help me, I guess, at some level with this information. And she was the comforter in a time that I think that she should be the one that's being comforted. But that was Jess. I think she loved to do things for people. She was always crafting for people's birthdays, doing things that were truly a show of her love for somebody. And it was just it's such a simple gesture, but something that I thought was just unexpected and just like amazing at the same time. And we had plenty of other beautiful, beautiful memories, but that one just struck me as, this captures Jess in a nutshell.
And it's beautiful. That's like, I definitely, as somebody with VEDS, I can relate to that on a certain level, Like I was a mess when I was first diagnosed, but then it felt like after I came to terms with it, I spent a lot of time comforting other people around me.
Yeah, I think it's not a favorite story. It's kind of one of these stories where people don't quite understand what VDS is. But Jess was originally like recommended to go to a rheumatologist um, because of the EDS diagnosis from the hospital, and it was sort of one of these. It was her mom, and her dad. I didn't end up going. I had something that I was doing for my class, which whatever, terrible excuse. But um, it was almost to this point where the rheumatologist is a relatively young woman having to tell Jess that like these are the harsh realities of your situation as 21 years old, and the rheumatologist just starts crying, which then in turn makes everybody else in the room start crying. And Jess's dad, Dave, is basically trying to console this room full of people, including a doctor, that this diagnosis is what it is. And it's funny, but it's also kind of like sad at the same
It
time.
is,
But it's
yeah.
like, you know, the reality of the situation. There's just nothing. There's no pill for what VDS people have. Like, there's nothing that can cure it. You don't have this thing that everybody wishes the doctor can have. Like you go to the doctor and you're sick, they're going to give you something, but you have VDS and they tell you like the harsh reality of the situation, and it even makes doctors cry.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
Jess, I think she always handled it really well, even with the way things are even handled sometimes with doctors not knowing exactly what to say. Because I think at the end of the day, doctors don't like to have to tell patients that there's nothing they can do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a hard thing as a doctor, I imagine, too.
Yeah, I mean, basically telling somebody at 21 years old like you shouldn't be having children, like this, that, and the other, like that's some hard news to tell somebody.
Yeah. Well, I'm really grateful that you're sharing her story here and your story. If you had something that you could tell somebody else who's a partner or a spouse or a significant other or somebody with VEDS, what would that be?
I think something that Jess and I didn't do, but I became aware of a little later, and I think it was actually probably something we should have been doing for a long time. Go see somebody. Like, don't try to think that you're Superman and that you too can handle this on your own. Like, go see a counselor. Go see somebody that can kind of be an additional support that's outside of your family, because I think this isn't normal that people have to deal with this diagnosis and uncertainty of uh, you know impending death, but there's no real time on it. Like you don't know when it'll happen. It just might happen. And that's something that I don't think that, well, I know for certain I didn't handle it very well. It's at times, but, and you don't want to constantly have to talk to your significant other about it. It's that you too should go talk to somebody else and try to figure out healthy ways to kind of manage this uncertainty and this really, you know, terrible situation that you've been handed.
Yeah, and that's a really good way to put it, that it's not normal to have to deal with this.
Yeah. And it's something that I don't even know. I kept thinking that I just kept thinking we have more time, and I think that that's sort of a shame. Don't expect that you have more time. You
Yeah.
just don't know when it'll happen, but don't assume that you'll have more time, because I think that's sort of something that I always question in the back of my head. It's like the little things. You're like, oh, well, crap. Like, I was doing all these things and kind of living a normal life. Like, people have things that they have to talk through with their significant others, and you're trying to get things set up in a way that makes sense. Like us eventually trying to move out to Seattle. These conversations are hard to have with people that don't have VEDS, but I think it's even more difficult and with somebody that does. And I think Jess was having trouble with being 27, being the same age that her mom was when she passed away. And I wasn't fully aware of it And that's probably partially on me. I never asked. But I think, if you have a secondary support system that's not part of your family, I think that they can help you cope with certain things that come up in your life that you need to handle in probably a different way than most other people handle.
Mm-hmm. Well, if there is any one last thing that you would want everybody to know about Jess, what would it be?
I'm sure a lot of people say this about people that pass away, but Jess really was just a bright spot in not only my life, but I think a lot of people's lives that she touched. She always was a positive person, kind of regardless of her diagnosis. And I think that's something that I want to have taken forward, and I hope people take forward as well, that, we all go through some really terrible things. Whatever our life has, there's things that people won't ever be fully aware of, but just live your life with respect of others in a way that just encompasses a path forward in which you're still living your life to help other people out, kind of regardless of what you're going through. Jess never used her VEDS as an excuse, and she just kept pushing herself forward to make a difference in people's lives as best as she could.
I wish I would have gotten to meet her.
Yeah, she was great.
She sounds really great. From this talk with you and with previous talks with you, it would have been great to meet her. And again, I'm so grateful for you coming on here to share her story.
Yes, no, that's good. I want people to know who Jess was, and I also want people to kind of learn from the mistakes that I think I made in terms of how to handle these things.
Well, mistakes are part of life.
Oh yeah.
I make them all
the
the time.
first rule is don't assume that this is normal, because living with VEDS or having somebody that living with VEDS, that's not something normal. That's something that's really difficult to handle, I think.
Yeah, it is.
And I want people to not be afraid to ask for help, because I think at the end of the day, it's going to be worth it.
Well, thanks so much again.
Yep.
And thank you, everybody, for listening. This was Patrick Westmoreland telling his story and Jess's story with vascular Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. This is a special episode. Episodes normally come out on the last Sunday of every month. And if you haven't yet, go ahead and subscribe to this podcast and share it to raise awareness of VEDS. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.